I'm Jeff Cohen. Shmuel Bollen is a user experience specialist, or as he says, a UX wizard with the beard to prove it. When he's not making user experience more pleasant and productive for his clients and customers or the companies he's worked for, he's the chazan and gabbai rishon at the Chabad shul he attends. His path to Torah observance included stops, one might even say detours, in some remote and surprising places. Shmuel, welcome to Saturday to Shabbos.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
So there is a lot to unpack even just from that intro. So let's take it from the top. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in London, in the UK, and moved to Belgium when I was about 6. We lived in outside Antwerp for about a year and a half, and then moved to the States and kind of bounced around between Chicago and various places in New England. And we finally settled in a town called Sudbury, which is about 20 miles west of Boston and quite near to where I am right now.
So with all that moving around, what was your level of Jewish observance and some of the customs that your family did at that stage of your life?
Well, my father is actually not Jewish. So growing up as a kid in England, we were definitely closer to his family. It didn't mean that I went anywhere on a Sunday or anything like that. But it did mean that on December 25th, there were some presents that would mysteriously materialize. And when we moved to Belgium, there was even a pair of wooden shoes that you would put at the bottom of your bed, and in the morning there would be chocolates and so forth. But I do remember once a year or so going to visit my mother's family and going to a place on a Saturday. And I have a memory there of being taken to visit the rabbi afterwards, an impossibly tall and imposing person. British Jews in those days wore top hats, which, you know, as a kid, that's kind of extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And then this person bent down to hand me a boiled candy, which I took. And then when we moved to the United States, my mother's father passed away. So he was the main Jewish influence in the family. And at that point, my mother decided that we would start to do more Jewish things. So we began to go to synagogue then. And, then there was Hanukkah, and we would have Passover. And so probably when I was about 8 or 9 or 10, not only was I the weird British kid, but I was also now the Jewish kid.
What kind of shul was it that you were attending in Massachusetts?
We only attended conservative shuls for the most part. The one that was most influential was in Connecticut, a town called Trumbull, Connecticut. The rabbi was actually from. And there was no microphones in use, and there was no mechitza, but all of the proceedings were conducted on a stage that was higher than a certain height. So halachically, there was no problem for him. And he actually distributed, as we became graduates of the Hebrew high school, I think I was 15, he gave a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch as a gift, which I still have. And that was the first time I kind of realized, whoa, there's more to Judaism than Hanukkah and Pesach and Shabbos. There's stuff in here about how to tie your shoes, about how to dress, how to get dressed. This is amazing. But at the same time, I really wondered, well, nobody I know does any of these things. So what is this?
So did you end up having a bar mitzvah around that time?
I had a bar mitzvah. I did not lane. I did the Haftarah. And my grandmother, Alei Hashalom, she flew in from England, and she cried in the front row because I was the first of her grandsons to have a bar mitzvah. My older cousins didn't do anything Jewish.
So when my son had his bar mitzvah recently, the rabbi gave him a chumash and a siddur as a gift. Did you get something similar at your bar mitzvah?
I got a pocket siddur, and I remember looking through it. And again, I found a whole page of prayers for things like hearing thunder, seeing lightning. Wow, that's interesting. Maybe a week or so later, big thunderstorm comes through, 3 o'clock in the morning, woke me up. I grabbed my pocket siddur, I ran to the window, put on my yarmulke, and I waited, and I said the blessings. I remember that very clearly.
And what was your perspective just in general on Judaism at this stage of your life and kind of what role it was going to play in your life?
Well, there was a disconnect between what I had begun to understand Judaism might actually be and the things that we were doing in our lives. By then, we would build a sukkah. The rabbi came to the sukkah. I actually have a newspaper clipping from then. So it definitely had a concrete, yearly cycle to it. There were things that you did, right? There was Shabbos and there was Yontif. But it seemed like it had an end point, roughly around the time you became bar mitzvah. You're like, okay, here's your pocket sitter. And, thank you so much for coming and goodbye. I found it hard to figure out, well, now what? What do I do with it now? And there wasn't really anyone at that time that I knew that could advise me. Didn't have, I didn't have a grandfather. My older male cousin didn't know anything, lived in England. My father's family, they're not Jewish, so I had cousins there that I knew, but they weren't Jewish. And none of the people in my graduating Hebrew high school class really had much interest. It was just a cultural thing. So that was the struggle for me, was like, well, now what? So I think probably around that time, I really began to kind of set it on the side, and there was nobody to tell me that there was anything wrong with that. I have 3 younger brothers, and they were all getting ready for their bar mitzvahs, which they did, and I went. But again, it sort of seemed like that was the goal. Once you reach the goal, the game's over.
So you just said about keeping it kind of on the side. So does that carry into your college years? You're focused on your education and where you're going to school, and religion is more on the back burner at that point?
Yeah, quite definitely so. I think by the time I got to college, I just had a strong interest in, the things that most college students have a strong interest in, which are purely material, and no thought whatsoever about any kind of bigger picture or what might be in the future or anything, just, day-to-day existence, which can be quite mundane and can kind of drive you to sort of more and more extremes, I guess. I think I struggled to identify who I was or how I should behave, a lot of moving around and, these cultural influences that didn't mesh. So I didn't really have kind of a firm foundation. So college was a little bit of a wild ride. Nothing crazy. I got into the music scene. I was in a band. I managed a band. I hung around with some quite famous bands. I was able to meet and hang around with a band from Ireland called the Pogues. And through traveling with them, I got to hang out with U2 and the Beastie Boys, and so that was quite exhilarating, but nothing really long lasting. Those were all sort of temporary experiences.
So you're mentioning these bands that you were circling around, but this calm demeanor that you have as we're having this interview is fascinating to me, because I understand that it wasn't just about meeting some of these bands. You actually get involved with some of these bands and you become the frontman for a hardcore punk band. So take me through this calm guy I'm looking at today who has this beautiful long beard. I'm guessing is not the person you were in your late teens and early 20s who's fronting a punk rock band. So tell me about that part of your life.
I think it's a question of identity, of feeling that I have something unique to offer and feeling that I have a unique characteristic, but not being sure what that is. Now you and I sitting here now can talk about the soul, desperate to express itself. If you think about a 6-month-old baby riding a raging bull elephant, right? Trying to control it with 2 little strings. It's not going to happen. But nonetheless, the baby's there. The soul is there, and the soul wants to express itself. And there was definitely an influence from above that was kind of nurturing that. So feeling different and then wanting to express that difference, I think, came out as being a punk rocker, because it's a very easy way to attract a lot of attention. And then that sort of satisfies that inner yearning to be different, the knowledge that you're different, and then wanting that to be apparent to others as well. That's like a very, again, that focus on immediate gratification. Hey, no problem. Just give yourself a mohawk and a few piercings, and people will begin to look at you and want to know the same things you want to know. Who are you, and what are you up to, and so forth. So, and that's once people are looking at you and there's a kind of excitement, maybe that's what brings it out from within you, like you look in a mirror, you see yourself. So whatever you're seeing from other people, it can be easy to reflect back to them, which I did.
So it's hard to believe. I'm looking at you right now and I'm seeing someone who easily passes as a Hasidic rabbi, and you're telling me there's a period in your life where you have a mohawk and I'm assuming the garb that goes with being a punk rocker. So how do you contrast those two versions of yourself looking back on it now?
Well, I think, Jeff, that we grow like trees. We don't grow like in a linear fashion. You can't look back at somebody you once were. You can look within, and that person is still there, right? They're a ring in there. And that's a phase on a journey from the seed to the full-grown tree. There are different phases, and trying to look back. First of all, living them out as you feel they should be lived when you're going through it is a great way to progress on your journey. And then looking back and learning a little bit more about who you are from those experiences. I think it's easier when you see it as still something that's within you, like a tree, right? It's a great Jewish analogy anyway, right? We are likened to trees, and I think it has informed who you are today. There are positive elements to it and the opposite, and you can strengthen the positive elements, and you can learn from the things that aren't positive. And the fact that I am the chazan today is a lot of fun for me to imagine me doing the same sorts of things. It's my soul expressing itself. Now it's through words of tefillah, and then it was through words of more emotional expression, and then it was more of a show, and now it's more as a representative. But there's a lot of similarities there, and there's a great continuity there.
And so for the punk rock fans who are listening to us, tell us what was the name of your band, maybe a couple of the songs that were the more popular ones.
The way the band came about was there was an older guy. When I say older, I mean he was in his early 20s, and I was in my late teens. He had been in an earlier incarnation of a punk rock band. They were called the Vandals. And he had amassed some proficiency with writing songs, and he knew a lot of the people in the local club scene. So he decided to try to form another band of younger people, which he did. I cannot remember how somebody recommended me to him, but he didn't even need to audition me. Once he saw what I looked like, that was enough. You're in the band. So we formed a band, and then we needed to find a name. So a few options went back and forth, and I was living in a dormitory at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and there were a pair of roommates down the hall who were Vikings. What do I mean? They were members of a Viking club, and they dressed like Vikings. They wore chainmail and boots and helmets, and they carried around shields all day long. And one of the things they did to amuse themselves was they invented band names and names for band songs and so forth. So I said to them, okay, well, what do you have for us? And they said, how about All White Jury? And I said, okay, because I think we had a show the following evening, and we needed a name. So we thought, okay, that's controversial. That will likely get people to ask us, why did you choose that name? What does that mean to you? And I think at the time we wanted to believe that we had, some social justice instincts. Most young people do. They might not know a whole lot about why they believe what they believe, but they know they believe it. And that was a great way for us to kind of lay our claim to that, by having a name like that. And that's what happened.
So let's play a clip from your band, All White Jury, to give our listeners a sense of the kind of music that you were playing during those college years. Okay, so as somebody who grew up listening to Top 40 on the radio, tell me what I'm missing in terms of an appreciation for punk rock music as someone who just didn't personally get into it during that stage of my life.
Well, it was really a reaction to top 40 music. There was a feeling that if you were a young person, you were basically doomed to an existence of corporate involvement. You were going to work for a corporation. You were going to buy your food and your clothing from a corporation. You were going to listen to your music and read your news from a corporation. And you're going to be stifled creatively, intellectually, culturally. You're going to be controlled. And the music industry, the entire entertainment industry was, fairly rigidly controlled. When punk rock came along, you were liberated from that. And being liberated is exhilarating, and being exhilarated means that you are highly active, and the music has to be very fast and very different, and it's really focused more on emotional impact, which kind of celebrates that exuberance of being liberated. And that's hard to sustain. So the songs are typically quite short. They're kind of bursts of energy. We might play all of our songs in one show and have a 15-minute set, for example. And then the next band would come on and they might say to us, could we just use your instruments? Sure, go ahead, just take our instruments. So it wasn't so much about the polish and about anything other than the impact. Are you able to make a strong impact? And so that's why it sounds very different than what you heard growing up, because it had to be in order to identify itself as being something non-corporate and really countercultural, almost subversive in nature, because that's quite appealing to youth.
And so I understand beyond All White Jury, you also got involved in a fairly well-known band called Dinosaur Jr. So tell me how that came about.
Dinosaur Jr. are from Amherst, Massachusetts. Two of the members were in a band called Deep Wound. And our band played with their band almost all of our shows. I would say, more than half of our shows were played along with them. And they later became Dinosaur Jr. Our drummer joined Dinosaur Jr. So to this day, he's their drummer, a guy named Murph. I'm still friendly with Jay Mascis and with Murph. I took one of my sons to visit Jay and Murph a few years ago. I have a son who's interested in music. And we definitely reflected on where we are now versus where we were then. It's funny when you have a shared experience like that, which was very intense. And then you have similar lives now. You have families, you have a home, you have a dog. And you can still look at each other, see quite a big difference, but yet connect fairly instantly back to those times. And I think, again, that's because we grow like trees rather than in a linear way. It doesn't take long to reach that common ground. And that's what happened. I ended up, managing Dinosaur Jr. for a short time. There were a few other people that were also trying to get them gigs and so forth. Traveled with them locally many times to shows in New York. Pretty hair-raising, experiences at CBGB's, very unsafe parts of town in the 1980s, right? New York was not the New York it is today. And great experiences, character-building experiences. Yeah, I was glad to have been a part of it.
So is there a point now as you're getting through college that you're transitioning out of this scene and starting to figure out, well, am I staying here? Am I going to do something else for the rest of my life? Take me through that graduation point and starting to think about the next phase of your life.
So as college came to an end, I began to wonder what would be after college. Much like as my bar mitzvah passed, I wondered, now what? As college was coming to an end, I began to have almost a panicked feeling, I think, about what would be after that. And the final assignment that I had to turn in was a research paper on a book by an Irish author called James Joyce, and the book is called Ulysses. It's a very dense book. It has a deceptively approachable introduction, and it quickly descends into something completely unapproachable. And I wrote a very high quality research paper that was due at 10 a.m. on a particular Tuesday. And that was my last assignment for my college career. And I knew that if I didn't turn it in by that time, it wouldn't get graded. I would fail the course. I would not get credit for the course, and I would not graduate, which would solve this problem of what to do after college, because there would be no after college. I would still be in college. And as I walked down across the campus holding the paper, and I approached his office, and I had those thoughts in my mind, and I knew that the moment I let go of that paper, I will have graduated. I'll be a graduate. And there was a thought that maybe I would just throw it in the garbage and know what I was going to be doing in the fall. But no, I held it just for a second in the mail slot on the professor's door, and I let it go. And as I let it go, I told myself, okay, you're a graduate. Now what? And that summer and that fall, were not happy times internally. I got a job. I lived with my parents, but was adrift, totally rudderless. And it was about that time that I became interested in Native American mythology and Native American history and then Native American customs and practices, because it seemed fairly genuine and it seemed fairly interesting. And I began attending powwows in Massachusetts and just kind of meeting people and just getting involved in that culture.
So if you think about Judaism, there's obviously an element of spirituality there. Are you searching for something spiritual as you're investigating this sort of alternative path at this stage of your life?
I think unconsciously I was, and then very quickly it became conscious. I remember I had been given a bread maker, and I had been given a coffee machine that had a timer. So one night before I went to bed, I filled up the bread machine with the ingredients, and I set it to start at 2 a.m. so that at 6 a.m. the bread would be ready. And I set the coffee machine to start at 5:30 a.m. so that at 6 a.m. the coffee would be ready. And I got up and I had a fresh piece of bread and a fresh cup of coffee. And on the one hand, I was thinking, wow, this is great. On the other hand, I was thinking, this is disgusting. This is it? This is why you go to sleep, so that you could get up and have a piece of bread and a cup of coffee? There has to be more than this. Feh, this is awful. And that's when I realized it was more of a full-on craving for a spiritual path that I could follow, that I would be comfortable with. And in my mind, it was not Judaism, because I had already looked at that. So I began investigating Native American spirituality more, and I needed something really genuine, like the punk rock version of Native American spirituality, the most extreme, thing you could get into. So I ended up meeting a medicine man from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, who was a great-grandson of a medicine man called Chips. And he was actually Crazy Horse's medicine man, this guy's great-grandfather. And I went out there. I went to Pine Ridge, and I became a helper to this medicine man. I participated in various ceremonies. There's no drugs are involved. There's no indecency involved. It's actually quite modest, which was interesting. And, a very real spiritual pursuit with fasting and visions and that sort of thing. And I stayed out there I was there for 3 weeks, and I decided maybe I'll stay out here for a while. My parents were not very happy about that, and they asked me to just come home first. So I did go back home, and I remember my mother asking me, what is it about that culture that's so interesting to you? And I said, well, they have these really cool customs, and they have these really interesting names. You meet a guy whose name is Waylon Long Elk. Wow. Or a guy whose last name is Conquering Bear. And she said to me, well, you have an interesting name too. You have a Hebrew name, and you have all kinds of customs. And I realized, yeah, that's actually true. I do, But I began thinking, the rabbis that I had growing up were very regular-looking people, and they had regular names, and it really wasn't anything appealing to me. So about maybe a day or two later, one of my friends, a non-Jew, said to me, you're Jewish, aren't you? And I said, I am. And he said, what's going on in New York? I said, I don't know anything about New York. What do you mean? And he said, there's a whole story about the Messiah. And so it turns out that the week that I left South Dakota was the week of Gimel Tammuz in 1994. And the event that really precipitated my leaving the Indian reservation actually was on Gimel Tammuz. I found out later through reverse engineering. So he said, this friend of mine said to me, look at the newspaper. He showed me the newspaper. And there was a picture of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe's name. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a rabbi. That's a rabbi. Okay. So that began my journey to Lubavitch. Very, very quickly after that point, I have an aunt who lives in Israel. I spoke to her. She said to me, it sounds like you need to call Chabad. And I was like, what is Chabad? I looked in the Yellow Pages. I found the address of the Chabad Center that I attend today. So that was, 25 years ago. And here I am. Baruch Hashem.
But were you thinking at the time, I'm on this quest for spirituality, I want to connect to something, but as I'm reading this newspaper, are you having this conscious thought of maybe I've been searching in the wrong places? Like I'm on the right path that I'm searching, but all this stuff I've been doing in the last several weeks is not the right road to be on, and this is pointing me in a totally different direction?
What it made me realize is that there are almost different directions. I mean, the Judaism that I was brought up with had no substance. It was a garment that you could put on or take off. So I didn't necessarily feel like it was a return to that. I felt like it was a return to something much, much deeper. And I was delighted to speak with I had at the time a great aunt, my grandfather's sister, who never married. She passed away maybe 10 years ago. And she sent me some family items, including this photograph of my great-great-grandfather. So I thought, okay, that's me. That's me. That's me. Not what I was raised with, which was sort of a version of that, but that's me. And again, then it was all of the energy and the exhilaration and the exuberance of liberation, being liberated from the problem of not knowing who you are and what you should be doing. It's an awful feeling, Jeff. I have all this energy, all this creativity, and all this desire, and I don't think I'm pointing it at the right place. All of a sudden, you are, and you know you are. Well, please do not stand in my way, because it won't go well. So it was a very quick adoption of a from lifestyle from that point.
So let's slow that down for a second. You get involved with Chabad. What are some of those early things you're learning? What are some of the things you're taking on at the beginning?
Well, the first meeting I had with the shliach here, he wanted to find out for me, are you Jewish, right? He's not going to say to me, are you really Jewish? He's asking a few questions, what's your mother's maiden name? So my mother's maiden name is a slightly anglicized version of a very Jewish name. It was Shocket, right? That was an anglicization, if that's a word, of a very Jewish name. Many Jews in England, my grandmother's last name was Schneider, and they changed it to Taylor because during World War I, you couldn't have a German-sounding name. So I said Shocket, and he said, oh, Sheichet. And I realized, oh, yeah, that's right. It hadn't occurred to me. I knew what a sheichet was, but it hadn't occurred to me that was my mother's maiden name. And he said to me, let me ask you this. When was the last time you put on tefillin? I said, I don't know, 15 years. He goes, let's go right now. And I rolled up my sleeves and I put on tefillin, and he helped me say Shema word for word. Then I began to feel, feelings of comfort and security and knowledge that like, wow, okay, yeah, just like the Lakota Indian practices, they have these unique practices that are deeply meaningful, but they're not mine. I'm not from that tribe, or I'm from a different tribe, and we have our own practices, and they're mine, and they're lying here in front of me right now. So big awakening, and I guess I was in my early 30s, so a big desire to kind of make up for lost time.
So are you feeling at this point like you're catching up on understanding Judaism from an educational standpoint, or that, wow, I'm learning things that I actually want to integrate into my life and start living in a different way than I was before?
It was the practice. It was Jewish practice. I wanted to direct all of my energies to serving the Creator. I felt a very strong connection with the Creator, wanting to make sure that I'm aligned with the expectations of the Creator. So that really did come first, and then, learning the whys and the wherefores later. I mean, it was a real like Nasa v'nishma kind of moment where the Nasa is first. I'll get to the Nishma, but I'm not going to wait to understand. First of all, how could you truly understand, right? It's Ein Sof. If I wait till I understand, I might never do anything, but I'll now begin to change my lifestyle to one that I'm comfortable with. I began to feel like my inner self and my outer self were in sync for the first time.
And so what are you doing career-wise at this point, and how are you balancing that versus this journey to observance that you're now on?
Well, along with my inner discontent of my teens and 20s, career-wise, I was a little bit undirected. And right around that time, maybe a few years before, I went to a temporary agency and I said to them, look, I don't know what I want to do for a living. Can you place me at a company at an entry-level position where that company does lots of different things, and then maybe from the inside out, I'll identify something I want to do. And they said, yeah, we have a temporary position at a local consumer electronics company called Bose Corporation, which many people have probably heard of. I started there. I worked there for just a few months, and I began to realize that I could add a lot of value to this very mundane task I was doing. And I did that, and I used that to get a corporate job where I had a salary, I had benefits, I was getting paid pretty well, and was on a path for corporate success there, which on the one hand was good, and on the other hand, I didn't really feel like I wasn't motivated to do any better at it because, again, I didn't know what I was going to do with all those resources. So fortunately, by the time I needed to keep Shabbos and keep kosher and do all those things, I was working at a salaried white-collar position where there's no problem. You're not going to work on Shabbos. You need to take a holiday off. You take a holiday off. You have paid vacation. You choose when you want to take it off. So I never had those struggles.
But are you wearing the kippah to work? Are you starting to grow out the beard? Other outward Jewish things that people are seeing? Or are you keeping those lives separate at this point?
Well, in those days, you wore a suit to work. So I started wearing dark suits, began to let my beard grow out. And right away, people started to say to me, you need to shave. You look terrible. And I said, no, I'm planning to grow a full beard. And also I had begun to use my Hebrew name outside of work, but not inside work. So one day I decided it's time to make the switch. And I was presenting to about 300 people in this auditorium. Bose has an acoustically perfect auditorium.
They should.
And I told the person who was running the presentation, you're going to introduce me as Shmuel Bollen. And he was like, but what are you talking about? Everyone here knows you as something else. And not only that, but I knew that my name is a little tricky to pronounce. True enough, the CIO introduced me, and it took him 3 tries to get my first name right. I wasn't going to say anything, but after that introduction, I said, you're probably all wondering who is Shmuel Bollen. And I said, it's me. You may have known me as a different name, but Shmuel is a name I was given at birth, and I've decided now I'm going to use that name. And I know it's difficult to pronounce, so I'd like to lead you all now through a pronunciation. I said, it's 3 syllables. Everybody along with me. Shh. And then moo, cow. And then L. We did a big L. So everyone did it. Everyone was laughing. I said, let's one more time. We went through it a second time and then a third time. And major round of applause. Everybody loved it. And for years after that, people would see me in the hall and they would either do this or the cow. And then that was it. I was switched over.
Wow, you picked a really public time to make that switch.
Yep, jump in, head first and just go for it. I really didn't see any other way to do it. I wasn't comfortable trying to dance at 2 weddings. So for me, it made sense to do that. And I even ended up legally dropping my English name and only having my Hebrew name. So that's it. I just have a name.
And so where along this journey do marriage and children come into the picture? And tell us a little about your wife's background, where her level of observance was growing up and as you two were becoming a couple.
So she followed somewhat of a similar path, had grown up in South Africa in a fairly secular family that, was Jewish. I mean, Jewish South Africans are like Jewish English people. They're Jewish. They might eat whatever they eat and, do whatever they do, but they're definitely Jewish. And her family moved to Canada right around the same phase in her life as my family moved to America, which was traumatic for both of us. She's the oldest, I'm the oldest, moved to a new country and still trying to justify those two worlds, the Jewish world and the not Jewish world. She has a brother who became a Lubavitcher in the early 90s, and gradually he influenced my wife and her sister to begin doing Jewish things. So my wife actually went to seminary. She went to Neve Yerushalayim for a year, moved back to the States and lived with her sister in Crown Heights. Her sister had moved to Crown Heights, so she moved to Crown Heights, and then her sister left, so she kept the apartment in Crown Heights. And we were introduced through there was a young family living here in Natick who were from Toronto, and the wife wanted to start a shadchan business. And they told me, you're going to be our first case. And they went back to Toronto. My mother-in-law and this woman's mother were close friends. So my mother-in-law came to visit her friend and saw this woman. Oh, so-and-so, where do you live now? Oh, we live outside Boston. And what do you do? Trying to be a shadchan. Oh, so you should find somebody for my daughter. Okay, tell us about her. So my mother-in-law says, well, she likes snowshoeing. And they're like, snowshoeing? The only time they'd ever heard of snowshoeing is when I asked her husband, who was a rabbi, could you wear snowshoes on Shabbos to shul? So like, snowshoeing? Shmuel, how old is she? They asked a few questions, and they said at the time they realized this is a shidduch right here. And it was. So within a month or two, we were emailing and calling. I went to Crown Heights in Elul. So that was in the summer. In Elul, I went to Crown Heights to get my tefillin checked. And we met. And I went to Toronto for Sukkot, for the first days of Sukkot, and we got engaged there. And we were married in Shvat. So similar life stories to that point, similar interests. And we got married in 2001, and we moved here, and we've been here ever since. Thank God, we have 5 children. They were brought up in Lubavitch schools in Boston, and now are, some are in college and some are in Torah Academy schools in Boston. One is in a yeshiva in Boston. And here we are, and grateful to be here.
So how much do you tell them, your 5 kids you mentioned, about your and your wife's journey and how you were raised versus how you're choosing to raise them?
So the oldest one, we told nothing. The youngest one, we tell everything.
Why? Why did you make that decision?
I think it's because, when we had our first child, we were both really just a few years into our journey. So, there's this strong rejection of anything not Jewish, right? There's just no interest in that whatsoever. You're building up yourself. You're building up your own fortitude and your own, identity. So you don't want to have anything to do with any of that. And then, hopefully 5 or 10 years or so into it, you've started to realize hey, I can, just because I walk down the street, it doesn't mean I'm going to end up wearing a Red Sox cap, even though everyone else might be. I'm stronger now. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't faze me. And so by the time the youngest kid, the older ones tell the younger ones anyway. The older ones have found out, this way or that way. We were just in Toronto for Sukkot, and I have 2 nieces there who are now in their mid-teens, and hadn't seen them in 2 years because of COVID. And prior to that, they were a bit younger, so they were intensely curious about me. And they basically interviewed me, much like you're doing now, Jeff. And I remember feeling then like it wasn't hard or painful for me to share any details, whereas earlier it certainly was. Those were not things I wanted to talk about at all. They weren't deep enough inside the tree yet, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They weren't deep enough inside. They didn't have enough layers outside them yet. So it is what it is. You know, you came from where you came from, and throughout our history, there have been, you know, some of our greatest figures came from backgrounds that weren't necessarily spotless. And some people from spotless backgrounds end up in places that are not spotless, if you know what I mean. So where Balei Tshuva stand, a tzaddik cannot stand. So we have tremendous milas. You know, we gave up a lot to get where we are. And we continue every day, right? Mesiras Nefesh is really, it's a real thing. You know, you have things that you want to do, but you're not supposed to do. And through not doing them, you know, I think that really is our avodah in these days. It is that Mesiras Nefesh, that Hashem really craves that Mesiras Nefesh. That's why there's so many temptations around us. There were not temptations in the shtetl. Yeah, there was really nothing there. There were other things. There was a Mesiras Nefesh that was a different type of thing, but that appears to be our avodah, and we come from a special background, and we bring a unique facet to the Jewish people, this phenomenon of people who look like I used to look, now looking like I look now, and being quite comfortable with both. I didn't tear up the photos of myself from those days. That would serve no purpose. I think it really illustrates the beauty and the power of Judaism, that it can take a person from that extreme to where I am today.
So how do you sum it all up now? You're looking at these different stages of your life, from the punk rock version of yourself to your time on the reservation and some of the spiritual searching you were doing to where you ended up through Chabad. How do you view that road that you went on in terms of, was it all steps towards where you are today? Were they detours you had to take? What's your umbrella perspective on the whole journey?
It's a noisy journey, Jeff. It's a noisy journey, and it's a classically Baal Tshuva journey. The Kohen Gadol had a row of bells on the hem of the garment, because even on a day like Yom Kippur, a holy day, a day of purity, there was noise. There's a noisy journey that Balei Tshuva have. The place that the Aron HaKodesh is concealed below the Beis HaMikdash, these winding, twisting catacombs, in the words of the Rambam. There's a kind of a tortuous, twisting journey, but that gets to the deepest of deep, deep, deep places where the most precious thing is concealed. And from there can come to the surface. So that's what I see.
You have such a beautiful perspective on the journey you went on, which is the perfect lead-in now to closing with what we like to call the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a few super fast questions. Don't overthink them. Just tell me the first thing that pops in your head. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, so let's start easy by you telling me what your favorite Shabbos food is.
Herring.
Herring. I'm allergic to fish, so that is not on my list. What do you like about herring?
It's a very cultural thing. You know, fish have very positive qualities, right? There's a very Baal Shemska thing about fish, and it has just a flavor that goes perfectly with a nice single malt.
That's a good lead into a question from our producer, Gary. He wants to know, when it comes to whiskey, peaty or non-peaty?
Peaty.
Well, you said that with confidence. Why?
You know, it's noisy. It's noisy. I like noise. I think a peaty whiskey is kind of noisy. It's got that sort of toasted Band-Aid tang to it. And my favorite peaty whiskey is called Ardmore, or as I call it, Admore. So it doesn't get any better than that.
And as someone who didn't get to experience Shabbos for the early part of your life, what would you say is the best thing about having it every week?
The fact that it's an incredible marker in your cycles, right? So you have a daily cycle of from Maida Ani to Biyodcha at night, and then the week kind of revolves around Shabbos, and you feel the week close, right? When you reach Shabbos, you've accomplished something, and you feel that the week has closed, and you feel now that after Shabbos, I can feel that the week has now begun with a special blessing. So adding that rhythm just makes me feel in sync with the entire spiritual cosmos, the entire Seder HaShtalshelus kind of revolves on that. Malchus descending and then ascending. When you're in tune with it, then you experience a kind of an internal harmony that is unattainable otherwise.
I'm guessing that you also have a favorite Hasidic discourse. Can you tell me about that?
I guess the one that I tend to learn with the most vigor is the one. It's called Ve'ata Tetzaveh, which was distributed by our Rebbe in Tafshin Nun Beis, 1992. It was originally delivered prior to that, but was given out as the last corrected, elucidated mimer. The most recent one that the Rebbe has given us is that one. So it's, I think, as people we're trying to be Hasidim, we view that as, the Rebbe's instructions to us. So if that's the case, it's kind of the summation of the, that phase of the Rebbe's Nesias, and we're in a certain phase now, and that's really kind of our marching orders every year. So to learn that every year and to use that to reinvigorate our daily practices, I would have to say that one. Although now that you're asking me, other ones are vying for my attention in my head, but I only get one. So it would definitely be Ve'ata Tetzaveh. If you think about the word Ve'ata Tetzaveh, or that phrase, Moshe's name does not appear in that entire Maimah. It just says Ve'ata, you. So when I say Jeff, you're going to look at me. But when I say you, it's a deeper level of connection. So rather than a concealment, it looks like it conceals because it doesn't use the person's name, but it's actually a deeper level. And Tetzaveh is only used that one time in the whole Torah. That Tetzaveh appears just in that one place. So we see it as meaning connection. V'ata Tetzaveh means, and you connect. You, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, our Rebbe, your job is to connect the Jews with their essential self. And that's a journey that I was on, right? Trying to find out, how do I connect my outer with my inner self? And it was the Rebbe, the Rebbe's the one that, that I saw on the front page of the Boston Globe. The Rebbe brought me on that journey. So I live with that mimer. If I could live with it if I could say after 120 years, when they say to me, Bollen, what do you have? If I could say I lived with a little bit of Ve'ata Tetzaveh every day, I think that might work.
And that officially takes you out of the lightning round. So well done. And let me just close by saying, Shmuel, well done today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for sharing your inspiring Jewish journey.
A great pleasure.
Saturday to Shabbos is produced by Gary Wallach. Our executive producer is Rabbi David Pardo. Our theme music is by Paul Uden. To learn more about us, please visit tachlismedia.com. That's TACHLIS media.com. Tell us what you think about what you've heard, or suggest a story we should know about by emailing shabbos@tachlismedia.com. I'm Jeff Cohen. Thanks for listening. Please check with us often for more stories of inspiring Jewish journeys. Saturday to Shabbos is a Tachlis Media podcast.